All right, we're now live. Welcome to the 12th episode of SecuriTEA Crumpets, where we host security professionals each month to talk about different security topics. Today, I'm delighted to have Dr. Ksenia Peguero, on the show today. Ksenia is a senior research engineer at Synopsys focusing on static analysis. She has worked as a developer, a consultant, where she performed various security assessments and led a research team focused on common vulnerabilities in the mean stack. She recently completed a Ph.D. focusing on client-side frameworks. Welcome, Ksenia. Welcome to the stream.
Hi, Lewis. Glad to be here.
All right, so your camera has frozen. Discord is the worst thing. So let's just kill the Discord and go again to make sure that it's good. Perfect. I have no idea. Discord's been playing up. Yeah, all good. Okay, so thank you for being on it today. So, we've worked together for a long time, obviously no longer working together, but, I wanted to talk about your consulting background initially. So obviously we worked together at Cigital/Synopsys in the consulting pool for a very long time. And I just wanted to know about, so you joined Cigital as an associate consultant, so which is like the early stage consultant, and you worked your way up.
As an intern, actually.
Oh, as an intern. Oh, I got it wrong. So you worked as an intern. And then joined as an associate consultant. And then, over those, quite a few years, you worked your way up to become a principal consultant, which is one of the more distinguished, roles within inside the company. So you started as an intern, worked all your way up to a pretty prestigious role. Could you talk about the journey of how you got there? Because, that's not an easy thing to do, especially, starting out as an intern and working all your way up. So could you talk about your background there and how that kind of became to be?
Sure. I started, as I said, as an intern with pretty much a little bit more than zero knowledge in security, actually. I was doing a degree in software engineering. I had software engineering experience before. I got an internship in a security company, and I was like, all right, kind of, why not, right? Intern, try to explore all the different things in computer science, and got stuck with the same company for many, many, many years. The consulting industry, at least that's what it is in Synopsys, was in Cigital, right? Has a lot of steps, as you said, like you're climbing through the ranks. There are all these different types of consultants, and I don't know. I think it was fairly easy for me to climb up to the ranks. You kind of just do different types of assessments. I think for me, the key was to focus on not focus on one specific thing, but try doing different things. Like I spent some time in pen testing. I switched to static analysis. I did architecture analysis. I did different training, a lot of training that I did. Training development and training delivery, et cetera. And you just kind of jump from one area to another horizontally. And at the same time, you gain more knowledge, broad knowledge and experience in people skills, which are also important in consulting. And I think that helps to progress your career up as well. Some people decide to stay focused in one narrow area and make a career there, right? And go more into practice direction, become an expert in, I don't know, cloud security or something very narrow. For me, it was more of a little bit of everything until I landed on JavaScript and then pigeonholed myself there. Everything.
Electrons for 100%. Okay. All right, we're back. So as Ksenia was saying, let's just recap a little bit. So what I heard you say that you were, you found it was kind of easy for you to kind of gain the ranks from a consulting from intern all the way up to principal by jumping into various different roles, like doing static analysis, doing pen testing, doing training. And I feel like I had a similar kind of route the way that you approached it as well. So at my time at Synopsys, I did get involved with a lot of different things. Like as an early AC, I got involved in, mobile, web, everything you could just throw at me, like network pen testing, etc. And then eventually over time I started to get involved with training and doing developer training, and eventually led into JavaScript and static analysis as well. So, and obviously dynamic analysis as well. So I kind of understand that. So you talked about all the different types of projects that you did. Could you talk about some of the projects that you enjoyed the most in consulting?
Yes. So I think the more fun projects for me were projects where I had to face clients face to face. So I did a lot of work on the back end, right? Like doing remote pen testing, static analysis. Again, you get the code, you scan the code, you produce some findings, that's it. For me, the more interesting thing is when you face the people and when you try to solve the problems on the spot. So some like what I think it was one of my first on-site projects was when I went to install AppScan of all things, static analysis tool, and I knew very little about AppScan when I was doing that, right? Like I knew a little. I did some test runs on VMs, etc., but I've never done a full-scale installation and training, etc. And so it was very challenging, but it was also a lot of fun because you get to interact with the people, you get to see what kind of problems they're trying to solve, and you try to help them, with the tool or just with your knowledge, and you build those connections with their managers as well, like trying to see not just the security problems that they're solving. So there's always more memorable projects for me.
No, I totally get that. So a lot of the time, especially in consulting, there's a large disconnect between general remediation advice and actually like the core problems that people are trying to solve. So you can say like slap this particular result on there and it may not actually be what they need. So like I truly agree with you. Having a very more intimate connection or general connection with the people that you're working with will lead to better results in most of the time, and it gives you a better full holistic view of what's actually happening. So I totally resonate with that.
Yeah, like there was one story with that project where the code, some of the code bases we were scanning was COBOL, right, of all things. And you can imagine the COBOL developers who were much, much older than me. I was very, very young at that time, much older than me, much more seasoned, who didn't want to do anything with static analysis or with our new and shiny tools. Because I think they saw it as a threat to their careers and etc. And writing code for mainframes. And at first, their attitude was like, "Well, you run this tool once on my computer, I will never turn it on again." Like they told me that up
Jesus.
straight flat, right? And then after I spent a few weeks there at the company and working with other teams, and then somebody mentioned that they have a chess club on Thursday nights, and like, "Oh, why don't you join?" So I went and I played a few chess games, and I'm not a great chess player, but I had to know how to play chess. And I met some of those developers there. And later we had much better conversations with them.
I guess that just goes to show like trying to build like a connection with people where it's not just an aggressive nature, such as you need to do security scanning or get involved in some kind of security kind of initiative. Normally having more of a friendly approach definitely can lead to better results, I think. And I think that's probably a big argument in the security space in general. So back in the day we were the guards that would say no, and we would put all the walls up, and now it's more we need to enable people to do X, Y, and Z, which is like super important, I think, in that space.
It also could also be that I, as a female, had to prove myself to them. And then they're like, "Oh, you can play chess. Okay, you must be smart. So maybe you know something about security. So maybe we will trust you on the security side as well."
That's definitely true. I wouldn't have had, as a white male who has a lot of privilege, I wouldn't have had to think about that. It would be more about how do I, gain some kind of trust with them. But going in as a white male, there's definitely a lot more, I guess, just automatic kind of response, which I definitely sometimes lose that connection from the other side, which is obviously a very important topic. I should probably have made some questions for that. I do have one obviously around your academic side, but I think that's a very important topic, which I think maybe I should bring you on again to talk about that another time.
Sure.
Yeah. So obviously I know I want to be conscious of time. We had a bit of a delay with the stream. So what were some of the challenges you faced in consulting? So apart from the writing reports, everyone knows that report writing is the bane of their existence. So what were some of the most of the time you go into some type of new project, or there's a new field that you're trying to tackle, like that's generally like some of the domain areas, but like what was
Yeah, learning a new domain is definitely always a challenge, but that's a good challenge. Understanding what kind of issues are important for your client in financial industry that are different from your client in the medical industry, that are different from your client in the gaming industry, right? So and that I think the challenges that we find with all lost top 10, CWEs, etc., NIST, like different standardizations. And as I'm working right now on the SAST side, right, you find some issues, the SQL injection or cross-site scripting or something, and you try to say, okay, what's the severity of this issue? Well, it depends so much on the code. It depends on the code, and it depends on the area, right? What kind of data you're dealing with. Are you dealing with your other gamers' data in this gaming platform, or are you dealing with this medical data, right? What are all the other things around this software? Where does this software live in the kind of ecosystem of that organization and industry? So, and as a junior consultant, you oftentimes have no idea of that. Like, you don't ask these questions. I think understanding that comes with experience.
Yeah, totally understand that. So, I mean, I remember a fun story that there's Riot Games, and I spoke to Dave Rook, who works at Riot Games, a long time ago, and I remember mentioning to him, that they obviously they get reports all the time for SSL version like 2, for example, which obviously in general people would report that as a pretty high thing because you should get rid of it. But and SSL version 3, etc. So, but most of the time, the previous Riot engine or like the game engine itself was using Internet Explorer, and a lot of their customer base was internet using like Windows XP, for example, in Asian countries. So they can't just go ahead and turn those things off. So it's always really important to understand the context, and I think that's a kind of good story, which I always remember quite vividly about understanding context. So I totally get that. I would not, thinking about like as a junior person going in, I'd get really excited that I'd have to report that. But now it's more like, well, they probably have a reason for it, right? So yeah, definitely with experience leads, I guess, those types of thoughts. So I want to move into research. So you work at Synopsys as a researcher. But obviously you transitioned from consulting to research. What did that look like for you? I know obviously you were doing some research initially at Digital/Synopsys as well. But what was that process for you? Because I'll talk about my story recently, but just would like to hear your side of the way it was for you.
Yeah. So when I was a consultant, right? Yeah, and you know that perfectly well, that somewhere in the consulting journey, you choose if you want to go technical route or you want to go more entrepreneurial managerial route. And I had a very good mentor. I mean, I had a lot of good mentors, but I remember a discussion with my mentor saying that I want to go managerial route. And somewhere within the same hour conversation, I mentioned that I started my PhD. And then this person's like, wait a second, why do you want to go managerial and you're doing a PhD? Like, that means you probably should go technical. Like, didn't you just answer your own question? So that was a very, very good kind of decision point in my career. And I started leaning more towards technical problems within the consulting organization. And then, it just happened so that I had more and more experience in JavaScript and training and experience diving deeply into an area, right, and producing some sort of training research for another client, for another tool or something like that. So when Synopsys was acquired by, Digital was acquired by Synopsys, we had an R&D department in a bigger company, the R part of the R&D, right, the actual research department. So it was more of a natural move to just go into that because I have been doing that for like a couple of years before, as still being a consultant while I was a principal consultant. So yeah, I think the differences that I felt between the consulting and the research stuff is that in consulting, you have results very quickly. You do a pen test for 2 weeks, you write a report at the end, you have immediate gratification. You found something, you broke an app, you found a bug, you got data. All right, that's good. In research, that's very different. Oftentimes, the projects are much longer in time. Sometimes you go research something, write a prototype, and then it doesn't go anywhere, right? Like not everything gets productized. Sometimes you go write a prototype, show it to other people in the company, and they're like, oh, we already researched that. That's not a good idea. Like, we already did that. We already implemented that, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a different, it's kind of on the moral side, right? It's a different in terms of gratification. But there's also at the same time, there's no pressure, that pressure that you have in consulting when you have to produce that research, that report on Friday, right? You have to also go and travel in pre-pandemic times and get on the flights and et cetera, like that. I did my share of that, and then I was done with that. We were starting a family and I didn't want to travel anymore, so that was good with the research side.
Yep. Got it. I kind of obviously looked at this a different way. So obviously looking for new positions after being in consulting for so long, it was actually very hard to transition. A lot of people would see consulting as a, you're only really good for like a security partner type role, where, and that's fine. It's a great role to be in. But, when someone wants to go into a more of a research kind of like academic / also, more coding side, when you're just doing a pen test all the time and just doing that type of work all the time, I found it really hard to find positions that would take me, for example, because of the lack of experience in, I guess, we don't write code on a daily basis anymore. The last time I wrote code for my job was back in 2014, realistically. So it was definitely an interesting kind of parallel there. Obviously, like, as a consultant, as a researcher internally, you write a lot of POCs, you build proof of concepts, you understand how a framework works, for example. But obviously trying to translate that into a new business or like a security engineer position, I found that quite a difficult transition, which was quite an interesting perspective from what I saw in the field recently. So I guess...
And I think it's also, from a pen tester, a security person, you're viewed as a breaker, right? Like you have this attacker hat. So if you want to be a builder, like sometimes people don't treat you, they don't view you as somebody who can build and somebody who can be, more like defensive, on the defensive side.
I guess that's a good way to look at it. No, I think that's probably right. Yeah, because obviously for 6 years I was breaking, and then obviously moving into building, it's probably what people go, can you? I don't know.
Yeah.
So I want to know more about, like, what does a senior researcher typically do in their job? I know this could be anything, but like, what are the kind of day-to-day activities that someone would do in your current role, like the types of things that you would do?
So right now I'm leading a group of researchers and engineers who are working on static analysis, on supporting different languages and frameworks and writing rules for our static analysis tools. We have 2 tools that we are supporting. So on my end, right now I'm just managing, but also, which means identifying the areas of research. Where are we going to go, right? If we need to support this new language, which frameworks are we going to look after? Working with the product managers who work with the client, saying, okay, which libraries and frameworks are our clients using versus what is used by open source. And then it's all, prioritization of our efforts. This is how many people we have. This is how much research we can actually do. So what takes priority? Which language takes priority? So it's very, very high level. But then the folks who are working with me, they're doing research, and then I'm reviewing that research, obviously. And we're deciding what goes into the product, what doesn't go into the product. And then once something goes into the product, also checking how good it is, running benchmarks, evaluations, trying to understand why something is not reporting what it's supposed to be reporting, why we don't find something in the code with no. So it's more of the, the research part for the engineering, actually, the building of the product.
That's very interesting. Now, let's say you choose a new language and you want to go ahead and get basically, start to look in how you might integrate that into one of the products that you support. What is the normal approach? And obviously, I know as high level as you need to be, and as much as you can say, but like, what is the normal approach that is necessary to be able to support a new language?
So one important thing is to understand, again, the domain where this language is used, right? Sometimes we get something very specific like Kotlin, and we know, okay, this is a mobile language, or Swift, this is a mobile language. So we know what types of applications we're gonna look at and what kind of security issues we will be looking at those applications, right? And there is very specific set of APIs that are used. So we're looking at those APIs and how they can be misused and what kind of security issues they can result. And then other cases when it's Python or Java and more general JavaScript, right? Like it can be used anywhere. So then again, we need to understand, okay, what our clients are expecting, right? If it's Java, like are they writing microservices with Java? Are we doing backend server stuff? Are we supporting built-in systems, embedded systems with this language? So what is a high-level domain? Because that dictates the security issues that we will be looking for. That also dictates the set of libraries that we will be looking for. And then we did dig into libraries and see what are the security issues, security problems with those libraries.
Got it. Yeah, I remember when we were in the digital days where we were looking at initial frameworks, and I could just remember, there was many different teams that were working on lots of different aspects, where some were just looking at how to model the application, like how it might look like from a general model aspect. And then you had the persons that were looking at the full data flow aspects of like, where does the data come from? Where is it going? And, where are the potential concerns? And then you had the research team that were doing the, utilizing the client-side frameworks. They were utilizing the third-party libraries and then looking for potential misconfigurations and vulnerabilities that may happen there, because they kind of have to all kind of work in sync realistically to be able to get to that, end goal of being able to review the tool. So
yeah, absolutely. Those are the three key elements that you mentioned. So there is the modeling elements, there is the data flow, and the checkers that deal with that need data flow, right? And then there are checkers or rules, whatever they call them, finders that deal with the configuration stuff. So yeah. And they have different value, and they it costs different amounts of resources to produce one versus the other, right? So then it's again a choice. Do you spend a lot of time and resources for the data flow issues that are very costly and creating the models and creating those data flow checkers rules, or do you create a lot of lightweight pattern matching checkers, right? So if you think of like SemGrep open source rules, right? So very, very small, very lightweight, finding very, I would say, narrow issues, right? Versus something that is like a SQL injection. And then you have to provide all the different libraries for all the different databases, all the, that have that data flow, plus all the data flow from the front end or from wherever data is coming into the database, right? Like supporting all of these different aspects for this just one type of issue.
Yeah, no, I've definitely seen the pain there. And a lot of the time, things have to be, the rules have to be very particular as well. So like if the rules are a tiny bit off, there's going to be a bunch of false negatives that are going to lead to so many potential clients missing vulnerabilities as well. So I can understand the pain from, I think a lot of new static analysis are going with configurational issues and secure defaults first. And then they're moving down the route of doing data flow and jumping into the realm of like pure data flow analysis for things like for things like SQL injection and cross-site scripting and so on. Okay, so let's move in onto your PhD. So you completed your PhD, was it this year officially?
Yes. January of this year, I'm done. Thank you.
Congratulations, doctor. That's amazing. It's an amazing feat. Your primary focus was on clients, frameworks, JavaScript frameworks.
Framework security, so not just the client.
Yeah, not just clients. So yeah, it was just so it was framework security. But before we dive into the technical side, I wanted to talk about some of the non-technical aspects of your PhD. So as you know, not I'm sure some of the stream may know because I've said it in previous episodes. I tried to do a PhD, didn't go very well. From the full-time aspect, and then went part-time. Didn't really work out for me. But you went from working in a very fast-paced, week on week on engagement type like consulting job, and then also was starting a new family. That must have caused a lot of challenges for you to be able to complete your PhD. So I would love to hear about what the types of things you were facing and how you completed your PhD, which is amazing, by the way.
Thank you.
So like what was that like for you? So you had a full-time job, you're quite senior, and also starting a family, and then also doing a PhD. Was it part-time or technically full-time?
Part-time
And
PhD.
Part-time PhD.
It was hard. It was long. I don't know how many years it took me. I took some time off. I went back and kind of off and back. I think I started it because I liked doing research. It wasn't, I just wanted to do it for my own sake. Like it wasn't something that would advance my career or something. In consulting, nobody cares about that.
For sure.
At that time. I remember actually when I was hired at Digital, I finished my master's when I was hired as an associate consultant, and there was a person who finished a bachelor's degree and was hired as an associate consultant, and there was a person who finished a PhD and was hired as an associate consultant. So I was like, yeah, it doesn't matter. But I like taking courses, so that's how I started, and I was taking one course per semester. It wasn't hard. I loved learning something new. I loved going back to the university and doing homework. Like it was not that hard. The research was the hardest part. And as you said, it coincided with me, with us like starting a family and having kids and all of that. And I think one of the most important things that I did, and that I cannot give advice on that, but I just married the right person. Like having the right partner, having the support network is the most important thing. The thing that allowed me not to stop, I would say, right? And my husband also has a PhD, and he said, and he like always says that he only finished because he was too stubborn to quit. So he kept repeating that to me. He's like, no, you're not going to quit. Like you have to be stubborn to do that. And then I had to do it at very little increments, but almost every week. Like there were times when I would skip and not do any research for a week, but I made sure that that didn't last more than maybe a couple of weeks. But I tried to do every week, do a little bit, every week, do a little bit. And the other challenge that I faced, and it depends on your maybe advisor. When I started research and I had one of the kind of initial conversations with my advisor and said, okay, what do I need to produce by the end of the semester? And my advisor said, you're doing research. We don't know. I was like, what do you mean we don't know, right? I come from an environment where you have deliverables. Like in 3 weeks, you deliver this, and in 6 months, you deliver this. And then at the end, you have this. And this is like, well, you're exploring it. We don't know. Like, well, do I have to write a paper? Do I have to have a presentation? Do I have to have a proof of concept at the end of semester, at the end of the year? Like, we don't know. And that's something that I had a lot of challenges to kind of come up with. And I had to come up with my own timelines and deadlines and, objectives so that I could work towards something. So then once we kind of identified what am I researching, then I could say, okay, by the end of semester, I want to analyze 100 applications. By the end of this month, I have to write a proof of concept of this. By the end of this, I have to analyze all this data that I got, et cetera, et cetera. And making having that support from my husband, who we had an agreement that okay, every Wednesday night I get off, as in like off of kids, and I spend a couple hours in the evening doing my research. Every like Saturday morning until lunch, it's my research time, and they do whatever they want. I'm focused on my computer, which was also a challenge because I did not want to open my laptop on the weekend. Like after you're sitting at your computer all day, like this is the last thing I want to do, but just just have to do a little bit, a little bit, a little bit every week, every month to make it happen. So yeah.
That definitely makes a lot of sense. I remember when I was trying to do mine, I would get on the I guess the overground in London, and I would be, having papers with me physically to like read. But realistically, like it's before you start work, you're already kind of stressed out. You haven't had your coffee yet, kind of thing. So I think the way that I approached it was probably quite bad. And then I would try and do it after working for a full day. I'd go to the gym and then try and do it. And for me, it just didn't work out. But I think you need to have defined repetition areas where if you stop doing it for a week, that's where I think that is. You got a compliment on the stream about how your fish tank is amazing, by the way. So, which I agree. It's and also the lights are also a good touch. But yeah, so around, I think having repetition is very important, and dedicating time either each week to either read, because like there's a lot of things to do in research. There is reading the initial background. There is building proof of concepts. There is obviously doing experiments and so on. So yeah, definitely can understand that, and having a support system, which you definitely had, is definitely going to allow you to succeed. Yeah.
And actually, you reminded me, before pandemic, when we used to go to the office, yes, we had that agreement of like the Wednesday nights. I would actually stay in the office. I would finish my work at 4:30, turn off my work computer, open my personal computer. And when everybody leaves the office, I'm still there, but I'm doing my research just because this is the quiet, empty place where I don't get distracted. I'll turn off my phone, no social media. I'm just doing my kind of getting into the zone and getting that done. It's much harder. It was much harder during the pandemic, obviously. So,
yeah,
and then I had my advisor changed. Well, like my initial advisor got a position at a different university, so I had to find another advisor, and that was another challenge in of its own. Building the new relationship with an advisor. I didn't want to switch the topic and kind of trying to explain to the new advisor, this is what I'm researching, this is why it's important, and all the different little aspects. And then a year ago, a little bit over a year ago, my second advisor mentioned that she is going to another university.
Oh God.
And yes, and she actually took a position somewhere else, and she had 1 year with my university, was George Washington University, to finish all of her students. Like basically, I can lead you for 1 more year. Either you finish in this year or you have to find a new advisor. So that's what prompted me to finish really, really quickly because I did not want to change the advisor again. And that's, it's not because my advisors were just changing positions. It took me more than 10 years to finish. So it makes sense that, people move from one place to another. It's rare that people stay in one place for so long. I guess I did with my work and my PhD. But yeah, because I was doing it part-time, it took a very long time. And I was pregnant with my second child. And my advisor said, you have to finish before you give birth. You cannot do it with 2 children. You have to finish. And I didn't. I was not able to defend before, also because my second child came 2 weeks early and it was around Christmas. So, other professors were all on vacation, etc. But I finished that, as I said, early January. So when my second child was 1 month old, again, it helped that my husband was on parental leave, which stresses the importance of parental leave for both mothers and fathers. So he was home with the baby, so I could finish preparing and defending and like doing this last push. So, yeah.
Many levels of stress from various different locations. It sounds like Jesus Christ. Yeah, that's that's amazing that you finished. So let's talk about some of the research as well. So do you want to just give a kind of it's obviously now that you're done, it's fine, we can talk about this, but like we used to ask people like, what are you doing in your PhD, and the title would change all the time, the description would probably change like over like every other month kind of thing until you finally get to the final I guess the final piece. But what was your research in?
So the topic is actually very kind of easy and straightforward, and the topic was the impact of frameworks on security of JavaScript applications. So there are three big pieces, right? There's the JavaScript applications. So again, the language that I was mostly familiar with, the language that I researched a lot for work, and that's why I chose it, right? I also knew that if I try to research at the university and the academia something completely different from what I'm doing at work, there will be no bandwidth, right? I have to kind of cross-pollinate here. So I took JavaScript applications, security, obviously something that I knew. And then I looked at the frameworks. So in JavaScript, there are a lot of different frameworks, client side, server side, desktop applications. And I wanted to see if the framework makes a difference, making an application more secure or less secure, right? Can we write, obviously a framework is basically a bunch of third-party code. And we all know that third-party code impacts your security, or the security of your application. And we oftentimes say it impacts it badly. Well, what you hear on the news, right, is there is a vulnerability in this third-party library, you pulled it in, and all these applications are now vulnerable, and et cetera. You have to patch, you have to update your dependencies, all of that side. But my question was, well, can it make your writing of code better, more secure? We use the frameworks because we want to get the efficiencies in development. We want to write the code faster, get all these patterns that we can use and reuse. Well, can we kind of put the security patterns into the frameworks so that you write your applications that are secure out of the box? So that's what I was looking at.
Now I have a bit of it's probably like one of those questions that has no answer at all. But from your research, was there one framework to rule them all? Was there one that you just saw that was so superior that everyone should use it? Or realistically, there's it depends.
It depends, because also, even if I say, this framework is excellent and it is secure, it may not meet your needs, right? Like the frameworks, when we choose a framework, we choose it not because it is the most secure, but we choose it on the feature basis, right? Mm-hmm. Do you need a client-side framework? Do you need a server-side framework? Do you need it for REST applications? Do you need it for microservices? Do you need it for big data? Like what functionality do you need? But then if you look at the client side, JavaScript client side, there was one framework. There was Angular, for example, that JS at the beginning, right, that came out, and it had that idea of building security of having the contextually based output encoding, of kind of extracting all of these things, all of these ways to have a cross-site scripting, right, and removing them so that developers didn't have to worry about that. So that was their initial idea. And then this idea was picked up by other frameworks as well, by, the continuation of it with Angular, there is React, there is Vue, all of the other template engines. So this is just on the client side. So they definitely make client-side code more secure. And similarly, it's true for server side. Like some frameworks are built with the security configurations, built into it, or have some sort of modular approach where you can kind of put your security modules in. But then the question is, well, does it solve your other problems? Is it performant enough? Does it provide the data structures that you need for your application?
So I have another question, which I guess is also it depends, but like, what are some of the misconceptions with frameworks? Do they make us secure by default? I know this is, again, a silly question.
A loaded question. Well, I mean, if you want to bring up my slide from my research, right? When I talk about the security of the framework, basically my idea was that if the security control is something that fixes a security issue, right? It may be a sanitization library, it may be an authorization library, or something like that. So my hypothesis was that if the security control is as close to the framework as possible, it will make application more secure. So if you have to write your own user management system, right, you are more likely to have more mistakes. If you use a third-party library for the user management system, you will make fewer mistakes. If you use a plugin for user management that's in your framework, you kind of make even less mistakes, even fewer mistakes. And then if it's built into the framework and like it takes care of all the session management, it takes care of the password management, all of these things, then your application should be secure out of the box. So that was my hypothesis. And then it kind of makes sense, right? But in academia, what I kind of like about academia versus the industry is that you have to prove everything with the data. Like if I were a consultant and I came to the client and I said this pitch, they're like, yeah, sure, that makes sense. We trust you, right? But in academia, they're like, well, show us the data. Is it actually true? So that's what I did, right? I looked at a bunch of applications written with different frameworks and saw how many vulnerabilities each of them had, depending on this level of mitigation, that where we put that mitigation, where we put that control, right? Security control. So one of the misconceptions was that if it is built in the framework, we would say, yes, it makes applications more secure. And what I discovered with my second experiment is that it's only more secure if the default settings are secure. So one example that I looked at was a cross-site request forgery vulnerability and CSRF tokens, CSRF protections that were built into the framework. So there was one framework that had a plugin for CSRF. I looked at Express and Koa that had CSRF plugins. And then I looked at Happy.js that had CSRF built into it by default. Well, it was built into it, but by default, it was set to false. And out of, I forget how many applications I looked at, I'll have to go back to the data, but none of them turned it on. Like maybe a handful turned them on, right? But if it's a security feature that's built into it, but it's not enabled, it doesn't change the security of your application. So it kind of stressed again and again and again the fact that default settings are very important. Yeah. And I know we always talk about the trade-off, security versus functionality. So sometimes when we enable that secure default settings, it makes the application slower, more cumbersome, etc. So it's very tricky. How do you build that security in without compromising functionality or any other features of the application?
Yeah, I remember, so I'm showing your CSRF protections in frameworks, and obviously for most applications, you need to normally add them as middleware, at least in Node.js applications. So like in your examples, you have Express and you have to include the CSRF module and then use that with inside Express. The same for, if you're using something like Koa, you still need to do the same. And I remember in some cases where only particular, like post methods, for example, and, put were supported for automatic CSRF protection in these types of frameworks, but then things like GET requests and other aspects were also not actually supported, and you had to by default. So you had to go in and enable those things, which were really interesting from like a security scenario, because yes, you are doing the right thing and you are including these security protections, but it does prevent you in some scenarios from actually being able to support that out the box. Which I thought was quite interesting.
Yeah, because you're not meant, like those methods, the GET, for example, requests are not meant to change the state of the data on the server. Yeah. However, they can be used in that way, and in this case, you have to protect them with CSRF token. So
exactly, and like newer technology, things like GraphQL, etc., like that can actually be used in the query parameter too. So technically, you can use it in GET in most modern applications these days too. So I know we only have a short period of time left, but I wanted to talk about the levels of mitigation that you talked about. I attended this talk in Amsterdam, and it was a really awesome talk. And I remember you mentioning that John Stephen, who used to be the CTO of Cigital at the time.
Cigital, yep.
And you mentioned that he said that there's these concepts of levels of vulnerability mitigation, and obviously you expanded on that. So could you talk about the levels of vulnerability mitigation and like what that means?
Yeah. So when we trying to resolve a security issue, right? When you were trying to build a protection, we can have a mitigation at the first level where it's a developer code. So, for example, you write your own crypto function, right? Which don't do that. But if then the next level, you may be using a third-party library. So somebody already did that. Hopefully they did a good job. You pull that in. That's kind of the second level of mitigation. Then the next level is if you are pulling in a plugin for the framework that you're using. So the difference between a third-party library, well, a plugin is a third-party library, but it's usually integrated with the framework more seamlessly. It's easier to configure it. Sometimes it's just, maybe you add it in the configuration file and everything works magically. And then the next level, level 4, is when this security control is already built into the framework. And actually, so I believe this presentation I did on the CSRF, so that was my kind of second experiment that I was doing. And then I did my third experiment. And with that, I found that there is even the next level down when the security control is built into the platform. So maybe even the language itself or the platform itself. So it doesn't need to be in the framework, kind of even deeper. And a good example of that is memory management in Java, right? So like in C, you have to do memory management. You may have some library, you may have some framework that takes care of that. But like in Java, you cannot have a buffer overflow because it's done for you on the platform level and the JVM level. And then another example that I saw was actually with, let me see, with the Meteor framework for JavaScript. It's not a very well-known framework, but what it does is it's a client-server framework, right? So it has a server side is JavaScript and client side is JavaScript. And the communication between the client side and server side happen through a WebSocket. So when I was looking at the CSRF, cross-site request forgeries, the CSRF only happens when you're using cookies to maintain the session. So in this case, because you're using WebSockets, there are no cookies, right? There are no HTTP headers sent back and forth. So you cannot have a CSRF if the communication is happening at the WebSocket level. So that's kind of another example where this security control was built into the framework itself, into the Meteor framework. So you take any Meteor application and you cannot have a cross-site request forgery vulnerability in it.
That's really awesome.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I'm advocating, right? Like if it's possible, build that mitigation into the platform. But of course, I understand that for a lot of things, it's just not possible.
Yeah, the one thing that I obviously remember as well is just it's important too, but obviously a lot of the time there have been cases where people just disable security configurations. Like in AngularJS, there was the SCE provider where you could just turn off all of the sanitization properties. And then, there's been various other things, so like the dangerous API. So there are additional things where you can shoot yourself in the foot when it comes to using frameworks. But I think security has moved a long way, obviously at the architecture level over time for some languages, and also at the framework level itself when people start to build these amazingly widely used frameworks where security is already in the mindset. So contextual escaping, sanitization, etc. And I think that's a big win in most cases for security.
Yeah. And then another part of that is the other aspect that I looked at in my third part of my research is that, okay, I cannot rewrite all the frameworks, obviously. I can tell the framework maintainers, write them securely, build in the security controls into them, but I cannot control that. And so I was asking, okay, as a developer, what can I control? Well, I can control how I am writing the code. I can help the developer to see the vulnerabilities as early as possible. And so what I did as kind of the third part was bringing those security tools into the IDE. And so my kind of final research project was actually writing a plugin for Visual Studio Code that wraps around electronegativity, which is an open source static analysis tool for Electron, and then shows those electronegativity findings in your IDE, highlights the code, and kind of gives you remediation advice right there, then and there. And that's on GitLab. You can check out the electrolint plugin for VS Code.
Electrolint. I'll make sure it's in the references on the YouTube.
Sure.
So we're at time. That's obviously, I know you are strapped for time today, so thank you, Ksenia. I guess we can end it there. I really enjoyed the talk, and obviously this will be on YouTube if anyone else wants to watch it later.
Thank you so much, Louis. It was such a pleasure talking to you, and I was really happy to be on your stream. So good luck. Have a wonderful day.
All right, thank you. So that was episode 12 of SecuriTEA Crumpets. See you next time for episode 13.